I'm here to talk to you today about a question that was asked in my community, True Spirituality with Ange, on Facebook. And the question was, am I spiritual? In order to answer this question, I dug a little bit into the definition of spiritual, as well as the definition of religious. So let's look at these two aspects before we dive into the content. The Oxford Dictionary defines spiritual as the quality of being concerned with the human spirit or the soul, as opposed to material or physical things. It's a good starting point, but it seems to, at least to me, to exclude people who are living in the modern world. It creates this divide between people who have renounced the material or the physical, and people who are, have jobs, houses, cars, families, friends, etc., because this is quite a material world we live in. And I want to, I suppose, to express my concern about this definition because it leaves so many people out. Then let's move on to the religious definition. And the definition of religious is someone who has a strong belief in God or gods. That, you can see, is different from spiritual as well, in the sense that they're bringing in the whole notion of God into it. And I think this is important for people who are listening to this brand new podcast to understand that you can be spiritual without being religious. You can be spiritual without believing in a God or being part of a religion, okay? Now, I found on the internet a meme that I'm going to share in my community that lists 12 signs that you might be spiritual. And the reason why I'm sharing these things is because I think they are myths that are perpetuated in the spiritual community that I want to debunk. I'm not your traditional spiritual teacher. I will not claim that the mind or the spirit or the soul is superior to the body. I actually believe that the body is the temple for the soul and is a sacred vehicle for the expression of your soul on earth, which ties in a little bit to what the Tantra spirituality movement is teaching. Although, interestingly enough, most of what people know about Tantra, I suppose, in the general understanding, is that it's purely sexual practices to bring pleasure. And this is reducing Tantra to something that is almost a caricature of what it's supposed to be. Tantra starts with the understanding, and I'm not a Tantra teacher, I'm not trained in Tantra, but when I came across the book Tantra by, I think it's Osho, I think immediately, either in the introduction or in chapter 1, he talks about the body being a temple for the soul. I was hooked in the sense that it completely aligns with the way I see my body and other people's bodies and our connection between the soul and the body. And this leads me actually to very quickly say to you, in answer to the question, am I spiritual? The answer is always going to be a yes, because we are all spiritual beings having a human experience. And it's actually much harder to be human than to be a soul. And we might expand on this over the episodes that will follow. It's a misconception that some people are on their spiritual paths and others are not. We are all spiritual beings, okay? So let's go through the 12 signs that the meme claims show that you might be spiritual. The first is feeling peaceful with meditation or mindfulness. I don't actually think that we need to meditate or to have a mindfulness practice in order to be spiritual. It is certainly a tool that is great and that I commend, although everybody has a different way to meditate or to be mindful, and we have to acknowledge what works for us. And again, this is something we're probably going to unwrap in further episodes of this podcast. Second is avoid negative people or behavior. Now, I'm going to put a stop right here, right now. The word avoid, for me, is wrong. We are not here to avoid negative people and behavior. it's not actually healthy to avoid your negative feeling, because if you do, all you do is bypassing them. And there's a big movement in the spiritual New Age world, I suppose. There's a lot of people who do what is called spiritual bypassing, which is if you're going through maybe a grieving process, you've lost something important in your life and you need to process that loss. Some people will just suppose your spouse or your significant other had died. Someone who is supposedly spiritual might come to you and say, oh, he's in a better place. This is absolutely toxic. And no, there is no point in trying to avoid the difficult and uncomfortable feelings that grief brings, because it's part of the process of being human. You cannot be spiritual if you try to bypass the human. Right, so that was for number 2. Number 3, feeling compassionate and positive. So I've put the caveats on the positive because there is an aspect of toxic positivity. Feeling compassionate, yes, it's important. I think for me, but I will come to what I consider the five core elements of being spiritual. But compassion is also for the self. So I think for me, having been raised a Catholic, I have been asked too many times to put others' needs before mine. And although it is not to be commanded to be completely selfish and never care about anybody else's feelings or situation, I think there needs to be a healthy balance, and compassion also starts with us. Number 4, asking questions about life and death. I'm not buying that one. Of course, it's something that some people are interested in. I know I've been interested in knowing if there was life after death, if there's life in between death and whatever, or incarnations. Always fascinated by reincarnation. That doesn't make me spiritual. And you'll see for me the 5 criteria, or 4 plus a bonus one that I'm going to describe to you a little bit later. Finding meaning and purpose of life in life is number 5. I don't think that's necessary to be spiritual. Maybe you aspire to have more meaning and purpose in life, but it's almost like it could be a distraction from what you're really supposed to do, which is being in the here and the now, understanding yourself. Number 6, being hopeful when things are challenging. So it's kind of leaning into the positive, optimist kind of character. And although I can see why they're saying this, I can't see why someone who has a tendency to be pessimist can't be spiritual, because what for me is spiritual is about the intent of being kind. So of course you can be a pessimist and you can be kind at the same time. 7, believing that life is sacred. I'd love to have your input on that, actually. And I do believe for me that life is sacred. But again, that can lead to some manipulations around, for example, abortion, and trying to make people feel bad when, especially women, because they're the ones who have abortion, if they have to resort to this practice for reasons that pertain completely to them and that we are not here to judge. I don't want to go down that road. But of course, being respectful of the fact that the food that's on your plate, if you are a meat eater, has come from an animal, that's important. I don't think only vegetarian or vegan people are spiritual. And there's actually a whole movement in the New Age where some vegetarians and some vegans look down on people who eat meat. That kind of poses the question of, what about animals who need to eat meat to survive, like even your pets, dogs and cats? Are you going to put a judgment on your cats and that they can't be spiritual because they eat meat? I think that's taking it a bit too far. So I think the jury's out for me on number 7. Number 8, having a great level of empathy and intuition. Absolutely not. I don't think you should consider this as a sign of being spiritual. I have met a lot of people who were empaths and who were actually not spiritual according to my own definition. We'll get to this in a minute. So this can be a way for people who are more empathic and more intuitive to feel superior to others. And I think if you use spirituality to make yourself feel superior to others, you're completely missing the point. I don't think there's, and I want to share something that came to me quite early on my, I suppose, when I embraced my spiritual path. So we're all on the spiritual path, but some of us can be more proactive on it. So when I started being more proactive on my spiritual path, I wondered what to think of people who were obsessed with their self-image, who were into getting to the gyms, who were into doing their makeup for hours and their hair so that they would look great, who were into fashion, etc., etc. And actually, this corresponds to the profile of my grandmother. She was one of these people. And I had been taught through my religious education to actually consider these people's non-spiritual. What I was actually shown very early on is that there is nothing wrong with being happy to have a body, to feel good about your body, to want to feel good about your body. There's nothing wrong with that. And it is possible that this would be a sign of a relatively young soul, if you think about it. And there's nothing, just like there's no reason to be ageist in the human world, there's no reason to be ageist in the spiritual world. Just because you may be like a soul that incarnates on earth for the first time, and so you have this body, and this body feels amazing, and you're completely focused on that because it's a completely new experience. There's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing to say that this is unspiritual or immature or anything like that. It's our judgment that is actually the problem here. And I want to put this out there because once I started looking at people who were more, I suppose, who were more experiencing the physical rather than the mental or the spiritual, I saw them as maybe earlier on their journey. And I've never judged a baby for being in love with their body and playing with their toes and marveling at themselves in the mirror. I think this is a wonderful stage of our life. And sometimes I wish I had retained some of that self-love throughout my life. So we have a lot to learn from younger souls as well. Okay, there's not a hierarchy, not even between humans and animals, where you start incarnating as an ant and then you move on to being a mouse and then a cat and then a dog, a horse, and then a human. That doesn't make sense to me. There is no hierarchy. There's those different levels of experience, different vessels that are used by souls to experience different things. Right, so the number 8, I'm not buying. Number 9, feeling at peace with being alone. I would word it slightly differently. It's being at peace with yourself. Now, it can be really, really hard for most of us to be at peace with ourselves, but it doesn't mean that we can't take the first step of not trying to distract ourselves from ourselves constantly. And I used to do that a lot. I was so busy, always in the doing, because I was escaping myself. So there is some truth in the fact that when you start switching from an outbound perspective into an inbound perspective, when you start to consider that your inner world is as important, if not more, than the outer world, then I think it's a sign that you're starting to reflect and understand really how the universe works. So again, it's the way it's worded doesn't fit me, but it's true that it's quite important. And it was actually a turning point on my own journey. I went to San Francisco to visit a wonderful friend of mine in the 90s, and I met a Native American shaman who told me that I had incarnated on many different opportunities in all the different cultures. Like literally, I lived in most of the different cultures in Africa, in Europe, in Asia, in America. And she said, and now you've come to a point where the point for you is no longer to travel outbound, but to travel within. And I thought that was quite a powerful story and metaphor at that point in my life. So it's more about the emphasis that you put. If you put it on the outside, in the people pleasing, in the signs of external success, and if that makes you feel, or if you depend on that to feel good about yourself, or if you actually rely in your on your inner world to create that value and that connection. Number 10, feeling connected with your soul. This is utter bullshit. And I need to say this right from the start. We are always connected with our souls, okay? We might not be aware that we are, but we are always soul. There is a part of your soul that is in your body. This is how you were born. Your body entered your soul, anchored itself in your soul. Some people talk about a silver cord that attaches the soul to the body. So there's no way that you cannot be connected to your soul, because it's your soul that actually is giving you the life force to be alive. So for as long as you're alive, you are connected to your soul. Everybody who tells you different is not telling you the truth. Number 11, having a strong sense of self-worth. I don't buy into that. I think you can be spiritual without having a good sense of self. But it is true that the more you can rely on your inner compass for your worth, the easier it is going to be for you to avoid the traps of the ego. Now, I know we haven't talked about the ego at all at this point. I will talk about it in a minute, so just be patient. Number 12, which is the last element of this meme. As I said, I'm going to share the meme in the group. So we can start a conversation. I'd love to start a conversation around that, is being in the present moment. Now, I want to pull in here one of the 4 Reiki principles. I am a Reiki master. I really love the philosophy that's behind Reiki. And one of the key principles of Reiki is just for today, do not worry. Just for today, do not anger. And it's important that we understand that it's a practice, and it's actually quite a difficult practice, because we have such complex minds, which is a wonderful thing. We are able to project ourselves in the future, and we are able to reminisce on the past, which is, I think, and maybe time will tell and prove me wrong, but I don't think animals can do that as much as we can. So this is a wonderful opportunity that we have to be able to reflect, or to plan, or create goals, or have some aspirations for the future. But that can be a trap, and we can constantly be living either in the past or in the future. So yeah, it is a practice to try and stay in the present moment, and we'll talk about that in further episodes. But it's not a sign of being spiritual. It's a practice that helps us to be appreciating where we are. So it's a mindfulness practice. Mindfulness practices and such don't make anybody spiritual. Right, so I finished with the meme. Now I want to get on with what I consider the 5 elements of spirituality. First, for me, you have to have kindness as your highest value. The second is you'd have to have as an intent to refrain from harming or hurting other people. The third is you have to take responsibility for your feelings. The fourth is accepting that we have an ego, understanding it, and taking responsibility for it. So it kind of ties into number 2 as well. And number 5, or bonus 1, is aspiring at being a better person. So there's this desire to learn. There's this desire to keep an open mind. There's this desire to learn from other people, or to learn from life, and to take things on board, and to reflect, and to decide, is this for me? Is this not for me? Maybe it's not for me for now, but I will reconsider it at some later date. All this is very important. The reflection part of spirituality is essential. And it's not something, personally, that I remember being taught in Catholic Church. So I think this is the first episode, and I want to keep it quite short. So I'm not going to say any more on the topic. I would love it if you could write a review for this podcast, if you could share it with someone that you think might be interested in listening to this podcast. This is a brand new podcast that is trying to bring into your life what I call true spirituality. And maybe our next episode is going to be an episode about what is the truth. because this in itself, it is such an interesting question. So that's it for now. Thank you everyone for listening. There'll be some links in the description box for this episode in whatever app you're listening to this podcast. Please, please, please rate, review, and share as much as you can so that this podcast can reach more people. And give some spiritual freedom to people who might be locked into some unhelpful beliefs, myths, or concepts that have been handed down to them that actually are not serving them. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.